Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Mobile Deposit Benchmark Report. I'm Young Pham, the Chief Strategy Officer for CINT. We're happy and delighted to host today's Mobile Benchmark Report for the fourth year in a row. Today's featured panelists, Mike Diamond of Mitek, as well as Ron Shevlin, Managing Director of Cornerstone Advisors. With that, let's get started.
My name is Mike Diamond. I'm the General Manager of our digital banking group here at Mitek, and the group that's focused on bringing mobile deposit out to the marketplace. And so just a couple comments to give you a frame of reference, not only for the benchmark study itself, but for some observations that we have about the marketplace, because we, for obvious reasons, pay very close attention to what's happening. First of all, I think everybody on this call would agree that mobile deposit as a digital phenomenon in the financial services industry has been a runaway success. If you haven't done it, don't take a moment every now and again to hop on your social media channel of choice and search around for comments that people have about mobile deposit. It is humbling to hear from people about the degree to which mobile deposit has made an impact in their life. It is rare that you find people willing to proactively provide, personal details about misfortunes that have occurred to them and situations in their families and difficulties that they have, and the degree to which mobile deposit has saved their lives. And mobile deposit has saved my life is clearly an exaggeration or hyperbole, but I've heard that phrase personally dozens and dozens of times. And so it has been a runaway success, and a lot of the financial institutions represented by the people here have had a lot to do with that. But with sometimes in life with great success can come a certain degree of complacency, and realistically, mobile deposit has a lot of room to grow and a lot of opportunity to expand in the user base. In general, if you think about 100 checks that come in on the retail channel to consumers, about 85 of those checks are going to be deposited via ATM and branch, which means people are generally getting in a car, driving someplace, handing the check over to a machine, or in most cases to a person, and asking them to take a picture of it for them. And so, but only 15 of those checks are deposited via the mobile channel, a channel that's been proven sitting on a device that's very powerful, that's sitting in their pocket. So the industry has really, collectively, all of us haven't done a particularly good job, and we have room to go. So part of the benchmark study is to help all of us get smarter together and get smarter faster. A couple other things about mobile deposit in the financial services industry. First of all, I think we'd all agree it's not good enough anymore to simply have mobile deposit and say, yes, we have that. It's a table stakes offering. It's been out in the market for a number of years now. Some banks have had it as long as 8, 9, 10 years since Mitek invented it and introduced the technology. So the technology has been out there, but simply having it isn't good enough. And so the benchmark study is very much about what are the elements of consumer experience that are going to drive adoption and successful use. And one of the things that we can see in the marketplace, and I'm taking the lens out a little bit to a broader lens of digital banking, is that the easy days of digital banking have passed us by. Back in the days where you could say we have digital banking and people thought, well, that's great, and the numbers were going up and to the right with seemingly very little effort. But those days have ended. We've been at a plateau in the United States for digital banking adoption for a number of years, and so now, getting more people to adopt mobile deposit, getting more mobile deposit transactions to come in is going to require effort and coordination across a lot of different dimensions of a financial services organization. And those include getting the branch part of the financial services staff on the same page. And that means training people, tracking how they work. I know of one bank that I met with who has a requirement before a account is officially declared as opened, a new account. And of course, there are sales targets about getting X amount of new accounts opened and all the rest of it. Before they say that an account has been officially open, they have to have done one mobile deposit. So the bank has like $1 checks in the branches, and then they sit with the people as they're making sure that the accounts are funded and all the rest of it, and they do a mobile deposit with them. The whole point is you have to get your branch staff engaged if you're going to make a lot of progress. The early days of mobile deposit saw a lot of just fantastic, really clever, very creative commercials out on television. I think all of us probably saw those. It was just one excellent commercial after another. Banks put a lot behind it. But again, banks and credit unions, to a certain extent, seem to have adopted perhaps okay, we've done that, check the box, and we're moving on to other things. But when you're undershooting the opportunity, 16% of all checks coming into the mobile channel, it's just an indicator to all of us that we have work to do. And so it's one of the things that we want to focus on. This is the importance of doing that. And then there are also things around communication, making sure you want to do good jobs with, better alerting, communicating changes in policies to people. I think some customers say, I want to use mobile deposit. They find out that the limits are too low to be practical for them, so they kind of say, well, I'm not going to ever use that. If the financial institution increases the limits, as many financial institutions have been doing the last few years, they may be unaware. And again, this is where your branch staff is your best friend in terms of driving adoption. And then the other thing I wanted to point out here is that it's important to remember that in a lot of ways, mobile deposit is a thing that is dragging and driving digital banking. Of course, people use digital banking for a host of things, but mobile deposit is transactional. It uses the mobile device to actually perform a transaction. It's not just informational and viewing, as somebody once referred to it as view my money. It's not a view. Digital banking is not a view my money app when it has mobile deposit. And so having that transactional capability drives a lot of mobile digital banking adoption, and that's great. So anyway, we put together we sponsor this report. CINT does a lot of heavy work on all the evaluations. We bring in smart people like Ron to kind of stitch it all together and communicate it the best way. And we really enjoy going out and talking to banks about what we're learning and what they're learning and all the rest of it. So with that, I think I will hand it over to my friend Ron. And Ron, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that, and appreciate the opportunity to work with you all on this as well. Yeah, as Mike said, I'd like to take you through the study itself and really focus on three things here. If I can get this working, there we go. The consumer perspective, the mobile deposit rankings, and then a look ahead and echoing some of Mike's comments and adding to that as well. While I do get to sit up here and appear to be a really smart person, I'd like to share with you kind of the research methodology that went into this study. As Mike alluded to, a lot of the hard work here was done by digital strategy and design agency CINT, who accessed the live deposit counts for 20 of the largest U.S. financial institutions this past fall. And specifically what they were looking for in rating were 8 areas, 2 of which are policy related and 6 user experience categories, and you can see them over on the right. Heuristics were developed for each of the 8, which is how the rankings and scorings worked. In addition, this year, or this past year, early 2019, CINT also fielded a consumer survey to a sample of U.S. population to gauge their attitudes, their use, and their behavioral reactions to mobile deposit and banking. So what I'd like to do is first share with you some of the results of the consumer survey, and then we'll get into the rankings itself. One of the clear conclusions coming out of the consumer survey is that mobile deposit has clearly become a mainstream mobile banking activity. Of the consumers who are enrolled and using mobile banking at their institutions, a little more than half, 54%, used mobile deposit in 2019. And more importantly, or just as importantly at least, about half of all the mobile banking users said that mobile deposit is one of the most important features that they access through mobile banking. So it's clearly become mainstream and clearly become one of the more important aspects of the mobile banking experience altogether. And in fact, mobile deposit has become the most prevalent deposit method for a good chunk of consumers across age ranges. Probably no surprise to see that the most frequently cited, those who said that mobile deposit was their most frequent method, was highest among younger consumers. They of course have higher adoption rates of mobile banking than older consumers do in general, and about 2/3 of the 18 to 24-year-olds said that mobile deposit is now their most frequent method of depositing paper checks. What's interesting is that there's almost about half of consumers between the ages of 25 and 54 who said the same thing, and probably is a little surprising to you to see that the 45 to 50-year-olds have a slightly higher percentage than the 35 to 44 and 25 to 34-year-olds. But reality is that those are small differences in percentages. And then we even have a third of 55 to 64-year-olds, the older Gen Xers and younger baby boomers, who said that depositing checks is their most frequent method of depositing paper checks. So clearly this is not just mainstream activity, but has become most prevalent deposit method for many consumers, in particular millennials and Gen Xers. But that shouldn't keep us from identifying, as Mike was talking about, some of the improvement opportunities and some of the issues. And so I wanted to break out some of the problems that consumers have encountered using mobile deposit, and noting some of the differences in terms of age. And I've ordered this by the 18 to 24-year-olds, which was just sort of one way of doing it. I could have done it in any number of ways. But almost half of the 18 to 24-year-olds said that funds are not available in a timely manner. Fewer consumers of the other older age ranges cited that as a problem. And about 4 out of 10 of the 18 to 20-year-olds said that they had issues getting clear pictures of checks. I think, when you look at this, the thing to keep in mind is that there's always two aspects to consider here: user experience and policy decisions. And things like low dollar limits and funds not available in a timely manner are obviously policy decisions. Things like wasn't sure if deposit went through and issues getting clear picture of the check are user experience related things. And so generally speaking, these are the considerations that consumers have, the issues when they are using mobile deposit. One of the things I'd point you to is the very last line in this check, which I think is good news, is that very few consumers who are using mobile deposit say that it's confusing to use. In general, the user experience across the board is fairly strong. But they have issues regarding policy decisions around low dollar limits and timeliness of funds, and those are going to ultimately be institution-specific decisions that are going to need to be made. But I will focus a little bit more on that when we look at the rankings themselves. So what would cause people to use more mobile deposit more often? Interestingly, despite the fact that user experience doesn't seem to be that much of a problem to them, improved ease of use said that they would cause them to use mobile deposit more. But I think the next two answers give a lot of clue to what could drive some more utilization: faster access to the cash and assurance that the check was securely deposited. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on as well, and from a security perspective. And then lastly, from a security perspective, 3 in 10 consumers said that they didn't think that mobile deposit was secure when they learned about it for the first time. So in terms of going back to Mike's comment about 85% of the checks still coming through ATM and branches being deposited through those channels, you got to recall and keep in mind that one of the hurdles of getting people to adopt and start using these tools, mobile deposit tools, is a going in belief that there's a security concern. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up as we kind of get into some of the rankings. So let's talk about the new rankings for 2020. And I think 2 things I want to kind of point out in advance here is that we've got some new leaders in the ranking and some new ranking dynamics as well. I know this is going to be a bit of an eye chart, but basically what I wanted to do was compare the most current ranking, the 2020 ranking, to the last ranking that was done, which was for 2018, and highlight a couple things here. First, we have a new leader in the rankings after Capital One had led for a couple of years. They slipped down to the number 3 position, which is still not too bad, as we'll see in a minute. But kudos to Chase for taking the top spot with significant changes to its user experience and policy changes. In particular, what they've really done, and I'll highlight this in a minute as well, is really made the flow of mobile deposit very seamless, and have also improved a lot of their communication around cutoff times and what to do with checks after they've been deposited. Also want to shout out to Navy Federal Credit Union, which was the big gainer in this particular ranking, going from 17th to 10th in the rankings with on the strength of increases in its deposit limits and a decrease in check retention limits. You can see some have slipped from a year-to-year basis, but really highlighting Chase as the new leader, and the jump from Navy Federal Credit Union. I wanted to give the kudos to them for their improvement in the rankings. If we kind of look at this from the heuristics perspective in this heat map, I know this is another eye chart here, but let me kind of point out what I think this chart is really saying here. I really think that there are 3 segments of institutions that are emerging from this. The top 3, Chase, Citibank, and Capital One, clearly see a strong green across many of the heuristics. They all tied for top spot in 6 or so of the 8 heuristics. Each one of them tended to have one area of weakness. For Chase, it was deposit limits. For Citibank and Capital One, error and prevention. But for the most part, these are the 3 institutions that really stand out. Following them with the next 3, U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, and SunTrust, who again, very strong on 6 of the 8 heuristics, but weaker on 2 of them. In this case, policy decisions for both of them. Deposit limits, or not for both, for all 3 of them, I should say. Deposit limits and recommended paper check hold times, they scored relatively low in those areas, which kind of brought them out of contention for the top 3 spots. Then you've got another 10 or so institutions that are mixed in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, and then a couple at the bottom who tended to be weaker in the majority of the heuristics. But there are some commonalities among the institutions towards the bottom of the list that I think bear pointing out. First of all, they tend to suffer from too much text, a cluttered user interface, and an inability to access tips or help throughout the mobile deposit process. So clearly there's a lot of user experience opportunities for some of the user experience improvement opportunities for some of the institutions towards the bottom, as well as changing policies. So let's highlight a couple of the leaders to see what they're doing right. And as I mentioned, Chase has made some significant improvements to its user interface and policies. It is now a very well-branded app, which provides familiarity for both existing and new customers. And as I mentioned before, they've really improved the flow. So almost everything can be done on one screen, which makes users feel less burdened by having to navigate back and forth between screens. And as I mentioned before as well, they've done a great job of improving their communication around limits and so forth throughout the process. So highlighting some of what Chase is doing right. Also from a Citibank perspective, who came in number 2, check retention time is just 2 days with Citibank, and the app provides the option to deposit a check right when the app is open. So they're anticipating that many of their users are coming into the app to do this. In fact, in the survey we did, many of the consumers who said that they are using mobile deposit, despite the fact that number of checks are declining, you'd be surprised at the percentage of consumers who said that they still receive more than two or more checks per month. And so they're using mobile deposit on relatively frequent basis. And so Citibank is anticipating that many of their consumers and customers are coming in to the mobile app, not just to check deposits, but to deposit a check. And so they're making that option right there available. And they also bring deposit limits front and center to improve the communications. Capital One, which I mentioned before, had been the leader in the past couple of years in the rankings, has really set the design standard for many of the institutions. It makes users comfortable with mobile deposit, also very good about communicating limits during the process. They've led with check hold times and has been one of the first to suggest a 2-day retention before discarding checks. And also would call out Capital One for good use of communication through its alert systems, and all of these things add up to keep the bank towards the top of the ranking. So as I mentioned, despite the fact that they've kind of fallen from first to third, I think that the top 3 banks really kind of stand out. Another bank that I'd call out of making some really strong improvements, they were the most improved bank in the 2018 ranking, is US Bank, who continues to make strong improvements to its user interface with a very modern and tactical new look. The mobile deposit option, like with Citi, is front and center. It's second in the menu bar. Great help option that appears in the upper right-hand area of the screen. And also daily and weekly deposit limits are also very prominent. And like Citibank and Chase, who've kind of really redesigned things to ensure that things happen on a single screen, same thing with US Bank, where most actions can be performed on a single screen. So let's look ahead a little bit and see where things are going from a mobile deposit perspective. And one of the things I wanted to kind of highlight here that has stuck out in terms of both the analysis of this year, but of looking at how things have changed over the past couple of years, is something that I would think of as the mobile deposit pendulum. The competitive dynamics in the rankings shifts back and forth between policy changes and user experience enhancements. In this past year, it was really policy changes that moved some of the banks up the rankings. In the previous year, it was user experience enhancements. And I think as we look over the next couple of years, we're going to continue to see this pendulum of being able to change policy limits based on better analytics, better personalization for consumers. And then as new technologies advance, especially around the cameras and the picture taking, and as well as mobile design, we'll start to see more user experience enhancements. So I think we're going to continue to see this pendulum shift over the next couple of years as the mobile deposit rankings are influenced by this back and forth shift between a focus on policy changes and user experience enhancements. The other thing I wanted to kind of point out was security. Now, here's kind of a tricky situation. As I mentioned, 3 out of 10 consumers said that they had security concerns when they first learned about mobile deposit. It continues to be an issue or concern that many consumers have. But I really believe that financial institutions can address this less with actual security changes, but around user experience enhancements that improve the perception of security. And what I mean by that is really about communication, confirmation, alerts, things like that. And many of you recall seeing in the problems chart, there was a significant number of users who said that they felt that one of the problems they had was lack of confirmation that the check would be securely deposited. So, this is an issue that has plagued not just mobile deposit or mobile banking, but has plagued online and even digital banking for 25 years, and even more so than just digital banking. 25 years ago, I remember doing consumer surveys and asking consumers if they would shop online, and many would say, no, I've got security concerns. Well, they of course went away. And then a couple years later, asked them, would you bank online? And they said, no, we have security concerns, and those went away. So this is really about education and user experience as much as it is about actual and physical security, not to downplay the issues around security and of course cybersecurity, but from a mobile deposit perspective, this really, I think, it focuses a lot more around perceptions that can be addressed with user experience enhancements and communication. And as I mentioned as well, and Mike brought this up, yes, check volume is declining, but with mobile deposit accounting for just 15% of check deposit volume, that means there's a long way to go. This is not an area, though overall mobile banking, as Mike alluded to, has plateaued. Mobile deposit should be far from having plateaued. I tweeted recently the link to the report that's out and a link to this webinar, and some smart-ass follower of mine, and they're all kind of smart-ass if you think about it, mentioned, gee, why are we talking about checks, something that should have gone away a long time ago? Well, they might have gone away in countries like Australia and are going away in places like the UK, but in the US, despite the fact that check volume is significantly down over the past 20 years, the reality is that we're still getting many paper checks, and interestingly, a lot of them actually come from businesses, not necessarily other consumers. But the reality is that there's a long way to go in terms of not even reducing the overall number of checks or eliminating checks, but a long way to go in terms of changing behavior in how consumers deposit their checks. So I wouldn't let things like declining check volume deter you from making improvements in mobile deposit. The long way to go for that. And what's important as well is the extent to which mobile deposit satisfaction is driving overall mobile banking satisfaction. As I had mentioned before, with so many consumers who are using mobile banking, using mobile deposit, and so many of them saying that it is one of the most important features, clearly there's a strong line to be drawn from success with mobile deposit, or satisfaction with mobile deposit, I should say, and satisfaction with the bank or financial institution overall. So some of the key takeaways that I wanted to kind of summarize here, and we'll get Mike back in for some Q&A and some comments as well. Want to just reiterate Mike's point that the industry has a lot of opportunity to improve this. It is no longer good enough to simply have mobile deposit because of the increasing utilization, the increasing importance of mobile deposit, and that linkage between satisfaction with mobile deposit and the overall institution. Second, a lot of communication improvements are available here. Better alerts, better policy changes, and as Mike alluded to, better integration of branch staff into the communication flow. And another key call to action I would point out is that one of the areas one of the things that you can do to help jumpstart the effort is to participate in Mitek's mobile deposit health check. And Mike, can I ask you to take a minute or two and talk a little bit more about what that is?
Happy to do that. Thanks, Ron. And I'm going to follow up on a couple things that you mentioned before we go to Q&A also. But on the health checks, we have obviously we have a lot of domain expertise and deep insight into, of course, our technology and the way that our technology interacts in a broader infrastructure within a financial institution. So therefore, we offer a health check engagement where we bring our services team out to work with financial institutions to make sure that it's just like anything else, like tuning up a vehicle or something, to go in and just kind of make sure that the settings are appropriate, make sure that the interactions are appropriate, look for ways that you can have better results and all the rest of it. It's a good thing to do. So in the event anybody on this webinar is interested in that, please let us know. A couple things as we kind of segue towards Q&A. I wanted to follow up on. First of all, I want to touch on something that Ron mentioned. He made the comment, the declining checks really shouldn't deter you from making improvements in mobile deposit, and I agree with that. As a matter of fact, I want to double down on that and say that in fact it raises the importance of investing more into mobile deposit and improving the mobile deposit experience for your consumers. And the reason is that as you look at a long, gently sloping but declining payment instrument that will play itself out over many years. Financial institutions need to find out how to and apply themselves to figure out how to drive down their costs associated with that behavior. Mobile deposit saves financial institutions money. A significant amount of money. The difference in variable cost between a mobile check deposit via a mobile app versus an ATM versus going into the branch are significant. So as the checks are declining, it's backwards to think checks are declining, I don't need to worry about mobile deposit. In fact, the correct way to think about it is checks are declining, I absolutely need to think about mobile deposit. I absolutely need to drive customer deposits into this channel and away from branch usage. Secondly, I want to point out that when it comes to adoption, mobile deposit is a habit. And when you think about, when you hear people say, I've got a concern about security and so forth, a lot of that is because mobile deposit is still, a lot of us are used to it, but I haven't ever lost sight of the fact that mobile deposit is at some level magical. People are still stunned by the way that works, taking a picture of a check in their kitchen or in the train or whatever it happens to be, and it all works. And that magic can work against it because it looks so mysterious to people, and so they have a fear of it, perhaps. And that's what can lead people to have this perception of security issue. But if you get, and this is why it's so important for branches to get customers to use it. When people come in with a check, is your branch staff saying to them, hey, you know what, you can use mobile deposit on that. Have you ever tried that before? No, I haven't. Hey, can I show you? Sure. Well, let me show you. Let's use your phone. We'll do that. Here's a check I've got here. We'll put $1 or $5 in your account right now. I'll show you how it works. That is what is necessary to get people, because I've seen it, once somebody uses this once, they're like, oh, that worked pretty well. The second time, they're like, yeah, this is great. Third time, it's habit. Now, in most cases, they'll always default to mobile deposit, and you got to get people on that habit. And then third and finally, before we go into Q&A, I want to kind of lay out a challenge for those of you on this webinar. Many of you are thinking about an array of new digital tools that you want to be rolling out in the coming years that you want your customers to adopt. But you have this one right now that is magical, that works great, that those who use love, and you may be in the teens of adoption comparatively to all the checks that come in on that channel. Now, when I say that about 15 or 16% come in on average, that's on average. Of course, there's a number of banks that have publicly talked about their numbers that are up into the 20s and above. So the challenge really is, first of all, what's your number? You should know what your number is. What percentage of all the checks coming in on the retail channel are coming in via branch, via ATM, and via mobile? And what's your number? And then secondly, how are you going to get to 30%? And when are you going to get there? And how are you going to plant the flag to get there? And who is responsible? One of the things I've noticed in the banks that seem to be executing well is they've got clear lines of authority in terms of who's responsible. It doesn't mean that they don't have to interact with other functional parts of the business, risk and compliance and all the rest of it, but it does mean that there's somebody who owns the responsibility and has been given an edict or a challenge to drive to a number within a short period of time. And a lot of things don't change until you adopt that attitude, and that's true in all walks of life, not just this one. So anyway, you can tell that we love this space. We think that there's a ton of opportunity in front of it for all of us. We should all be excited about that. I really thank Ron for his work and for his comments here, and also CINT for their great work in putting together what we believe continues to be a very first-class and rigorously thought through report. And with that, why don't we, Young, I'm going to ask you to kind of walk us through any Q&A.
Sure, absolutely. And again, thanks everyone. If you haven't been able to, you can submit questions through the question feature within GoToMeeting. The first question that we have, and I know that it's topic of security has come up a few times in this study or itself, how many of the banks are using biometrics or authentication? And I'll open that up to either you, Ron, or Mike, but I'm also happy to chime in. Specific to this study, out of the top 20, more than half, roughly about 10 to 12, is where we saw the use of biometrics. But from an industry perspective, beyond the top 20, Ron, Mike, I don't know if you guys have further insight into that.
I will just start and then see if Ron has anything else to add. But just basically, everybody who arrives at mobile deposit, whether via a still camera capture or using our auto capture technology, by the time they arrive there, they are authenticated into the digital app. And so there's no ongoing or different authentication that has to happen after that at that point in time. As many people know, Mitek is pretty active over in the identity space as well, and we have a lot of capabilities there. But in this case, we are the auto capture capability, which I hope everybody on this call is using, is an SDK and an authenticated mobile app. But Ron, do you have anything else to add on that?
Just would add that S&P Global recently did an analysis of 70 of the largest banks. They didn't include really any credit unions in that study, looking at mobile banking features. And I don't recall the exact number, but an overwhelming majority, and in fact, I want to say at least 90% or more of the institutions they looked at have biometric authentication. As Mike mentioned, and I want to reiterate that, it's by the time you get to mobile deposit, you've been authenticated. But if that question was much more general about biometric, then according to S&P's analysis, I would say it was somewhere around 65 out of the top 70 banks have some form of biometric authentication.
Yeah, great. The second question we have here touches on opportunities for growth within small business. So did the study touch on this at all? And if not, are there any other highlights or things that you may be able to talk about anecdotally? And Mike, I'll turn this one to you.
Yeah, thanks, Young. Yeah, we have done some in a past report. I think a year or so ago, we did a small business survey as part of this. So I would point people towards that. By the way, just so that you're not confused, we switched up the naming convention on our years in the report this year. So we were releasing these reports in the fall and then giving it the year of that particular year, and then we just decided to kind of release it at the beginning of the year this year. And so the last report isn't 2019, it's 2018, even though it was just over a year ago when we released it. So I would refer people to that report. I'm sure if you can't find it, just get in touch with us and we'll get that over to you. So that's a great place. And that would be the great place to start. The other thing I would say is that the small business, of course, in financial services, a lot of times the small business people are commingled with the retail users, so sometimes it's hard to see that. But in terms of small business specific offerings, there are a number of opportunities for doing multi-check deposit quickly. So when you're getting, this isn't a lockbox solution. Obviously, if some corporation is getting hundreds or thousands of checks on a daily basis, they're not going to use mobile deposit. But there's a lot of small businesses that get a handful of checks every day or over the course of a week, and mobile deposit is a great solution for those people. Certainly a lot better than the traditional RDC technology that might have a kind of a proprietary single-use piece of hardware that's sitting on somebody's desk for these check deposits. And given the speed of auto capture and all the rest of it, we've had some races actually, and kind of seeing how fast can you deposit 10 checks with a scanner versus a mobile deposit, and depending on the scanner you're talking about, mobile deposit comes out favorably in those. So highly recommend that people consider tapping into what I think is probably an under-tapped opportunity.
And Mike, a follow-up on that. I know you just mentioned that most people are commingled from a personal bank account perspective. Relative to the apps within small business, are they generally separate or in terms of the distinct functionality? And we'll limit this to mobile deposit itself.
Yeah, I don't know if Ron, if you have any insights. I've just found that historically, the person with the small business and the retail account a lot of times look like they both look like retail accounts to the bank. They tend to be in service out of the same group and all the rest of it. And that's one of the challenges that banks have, right? Like if for instance, Ron has a bank account for his personal financial life with a bank, but then he also has a consulting firm separately with that bank. That consulting firm might be a very active banking user and a profitable banking customer for the bank. But if Ron's mad at him about something on his personal account, if they don't tie those two things together in their systems and know about that, they can mistakenly irritate what is a broader, better customer than their understanding in that particular interaction. And so looking for ways to kind of tap into that. So the good news on that is that realistically, mobile deposit is being used by small businesses. It's just the degree to which people are able to understand that and see that is somewhat limited. But as you get out into the sales teams that are out there talking to small businesses, or the branch staff that's working with small businesses who are coming into the branch, working with them, because these people are easy to identify if you're in a branch. I think we've all seen that. There's people that we probably all know who work for certain companies. And I talked to a guy once, he's like, "Oh, yeah, I go in on Saturdays to the bank with my, 15 checks, from the week." It's like, that's crazy in the 21st century. So when people see somebody routinely coming in with a fistful of checks from the previous week, that's the perfect opportunity to sit down. And that's just that's an attitude culture thing as much as anything else.
Yeah, and I would add, and I think, Mike, you're spot on. That's funny. The dissatisfaction works both ways as well. You alluded to, you're dissatisfied with the personal account experience. That might lead to the other. But I think what I see often is the opposite, which is because of the commingling, small business owners who are finding their experience hampered because of number of check limits or dollar limits. Then they're forced to go in on Saturday to deposit the 15 checks, or worse, because they may have some cash flow considerations. They're making daily trips to the branch or ATM to deposit those checks, and then hitting certain dollar limits. This is where the degree of personalization or personalization approach needs to come in. Is that they're being hampered by not necessarily the user experience, but through policy decisions, which are impacting their overall satisfaction with the bank itself.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out, Ron. That was a great catch on the issue of limits. I think banks are getting better at this. I call them smart limits. They used to be, banks typically would have kind of a one crude tool, like here's our limits for everybody, and I think banks are getting smarter about that. I think we all know. I know of a guy who was a former CEO of a gigantic corporation that, if I told you, all of us have heard and probably are customers of. And he's got a bank relationship, and he's, it's like they're denying him to deposit a $3,000, $4,000 check or something, and he's just always like red hot about it. And of course, this guy's net worth is quite a bit bigger than mine. And so I hear this story a lot, and this is an opportunity for banks to go like, listen, we've got to get smarter and more granular about how these limits work and all the rest of it. I can't emphasize that enough.
And Mike, there's a follow-up question regarding limits. Are you seeing the bulk of those in default settings now, or to your point, there's greater customization? How far does the industry have to go at this point?
It's interesting. So the industry has a way to go. I'm not going to pick a number. That's up to everybody's own decision. But one of the great things about this report is it starts to kind of give you a sense as to what's out there. I was working with the bank a couple of years ago, and they were showing me that they had raised their limits, and he showed me kind of the chart, the adoption chart, and it was kind of like over time, and you just saw, like, at this point in time, we raised the limits from this number up to that number, and you saw the mobile deposit adoption just immediately shoot up. That makes a big difference. Another bank that I remember talking to actually took an earlier version of this annual study that we sponsor, and they used it internally to go to their risk team and go like, hey guys, let us talk to you about why this is important. Let us show you what's happening out in the marketplace. So they used this report internally in their institution to drive this sort of behavior and UX improvements that were important to the bank. Because ultimately, remember, if you're saving, a few dollars every single time somebody chooses the digital tool versus walking into a branch, it is in the economic best interest of the financial institution to figure out how to drive as much of that usage as possible.
Ron, any follow-up, or should we go to the next question?
No, next question. I think we only have time for probably one or two more.
Right. Next question. How do we leverage in-branch employees to advocate for mobile deposit? Is there anyone that you see doing this and doing this exceptionally well?
I've got some thoughts, Ron, but do you
Go
have
ahead.
anything you want to? Okay, great. So I heard a great metaphor from somebody, so I'm ripping it off from them. But she made the comment to me, if we all think about when airlines introduced the kiosks out in front of the gates or in front of the ticket counters and try to get consumers to start doing that, they didn't just put the kiosk there and say, use this. They had employees standing out there helping them. And for most of us, we don't need that help anymore. And actually, most of us probably are skipping the kiosks and just using our phones. But at that time, getting people to adopt that, the airlines were really smart in doing that. They made it easy. And financial institutions haven't been quite as engaged in that manner. I can't overemphasize.
We lose Mike.
Yeah, I think we lost Mike.
Okay. Well, I'll jump in then to reinforce what Michael. I don't know where he was going with that story, but in terms of branch utilization, there's a history of this. Branch personnel were critical in driving online adoption and then bill pay adoption. And so, many of, especially the larger institutions, they've got some history here in terms of utilizing branch staff to drive technology adoption. I think Mike had alluded to, and I think it was a great example of, here, try it out with a $1 thing. And I mean, but remember, banks were offering, $5 off, back credited to your account if you paid bills online through them and so forth. So the idea of actually offering financial incentives is not unheard of, is a way to kind of do that. So many institutions like to say that their branch personnel are closest to their customer base. And so, one way of kind of really showing that you know and understand your customer base is if you see somebody continually coming in with checks and you know that they've got a smartphone, is, as Mike, I think Mike kind of alluded to it, to say, hey, can we kind of help you do this, show you another way to do it, or understand, ask questions why they're not doing it, because it might not just be a utilization, it could be the security perception thing. So it's about asking some questions as well as providing some incentives.
Oh,
right. And welcome back, Mike. And also, we've seen it in the studies separately. There are financial institutions relative to the onboarding process where that is baked in. So as banks sign on new customers, we've seen good examples. And in our experience, we've done research with some of the top 5 banks relative to size where that's built into the new account process. So that adoption and that training happens at the branch level there.
Hey guys, sorry for I got knocked off of Wi-Fi there for a bit, which only, as everybody knows, only happens when you're on webinars and large meetings.
It's okay, Mike. I think we covered for you. So because you dropped off, we're gonna end it with one last question, and I'll let you take us home. So are there specific examples of things that we can do related to the user experience that will be most impactful? So I think in that vein, if I can't do all the things that Ron has outlined in the report today, what are the key 1 or 2 things that can really move the needle?
I don't know, Ron, do you want to jump in or?
I think that the most impactful have to do with really 2 things. One is help and tips throughout the process, and the confirmation that when somebody pushes something, does something, that it was accepted. I think that's one of the things that kind of sticks out, especially in the user surveys, as areas for improvement. And when looking at the rankings and evaluations, is that confirmation that actions were accepted, done, processed, and so forth. So that communication helps and tips, I think, is one of the key aspects of user experience improvement.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback onto that. I think the user experience of after completing a mobile deposit, getting a message saying store your check in a cool, dark, secure place for 16 days is absolutely not a good message to have. In fact, people should be getting a notification and alert when those funds are available and the check has been deposited. And so I think that's a big one. And then obviously limits is always something. And even though it's not a UX thing proper, I can't. We really have to emphasize communicating to people, and doing the work that it takes to build up adoption. So with that, Young, I think I'll just wrap it up. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining. We are out talking to a lot of banks on a one-on-one basis. Feel free to reach out to us and get something scheduled if we don't have something scheduled already. And we are we're going to continue to do this. And one thing that I want to make sure of is please visit us at mytechsystems.com, and you can download the report if you don't have it already. It's great reading. We make it as entertaining as possible, and we have a lot of fun working with smart people like Ron and CI&T to kind of get this thing out there in your hands. So let us know how we can help. And last thing, what's your number? Don't forget to get an answer to that question for yourself. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you to everybody involved in putting this together.
With that, we'll end the webinar. Again, this will be made available, the report, on mytechsystems.com, but also will be emailed to participants on this call. Thank you very much.